Since the beginning of photography, every new approach to image making involved a struggle with existing technology because cameras lagged behind the photographer's imagination. The new T90 35mm single lens reflex is a camera that not only liberates the photographer's creativity, but leads him into new picture-making possibilities. The T90 incorporates virtually every automatic feature available and, even more important, has several features that are entirely unique. Some of the features of the T90 include a built-in 4.5 frame per second motor drive, 3 metering patterns, 13 automatic exposure systems along with 2 manual exposure modes, an advanced through-the-lens flash exposure system with a 1/250th of a second sync speed and off-the-film flash exposure metering. There's a lot more, including automatic film loading, DX coding, multi-spot metering, highlight and shadow control, exposure compensation, and programmed multiple exposure. Its 3-motor design also makes it an extremely efficient camera. First, let's take a look at control placement. Notice there are no dials, levers, or other devices that stick out to mar the sculptured silhouette of the T90. Camera functions are electronically controlled and button operated. Most often used controls are at the top of the camera, including mode button, metering pattern button, electronic control wheel, shutter release, and spot metering button. Highlight shadow control and exposure preview are at the rear of the camera. At the bottom of the camera are the controls for lock and film advance, manual ISO setting, exposure compensation, and safety shift. Least used controls are housed in the palm wing and include viewfinder illumination setting, motor drive speed control, self-timer, battery check, and manual film rewind. The LCD on top of the camera provides some 226 bits of information. It takes only 4 penlight batteries to power all the camera systems. You can shoot 50 rolls of 36 exposure film on high speed or 100 rolls on low on a set of batteries under normal temperature conditions. To load the T90, you place the film cartridge in the film chamber, align the leader, and close the back. It takes just 2 seconds for the camera to load the film to the first frame. The LCD on top of the camera indicates whether film loads properly or improperly. With DX-coded ISO 25 to 5000 film, the rating is set automatically and displayed in the LCD by pushing the ISO button. The LCD also shows the number of exposures you've made on the top of the camera. A display on the right side of the viewfinder indicates the exposures remaining, with numbers counting down the last 9 frames. With the DX coding, the camera is programmed to sense the last frame, and film rewinds automatically. It takes 12 seconds to rewind a 36 exposure roll. You can actually load, shoot, and rewind a 36 exposure roll in 30 seconds. Incidentally, with non-DX coded film, you set the film speed rating manually, and at the end of the roll, the camera reacts to film tension and automatically goes into rewind. Pressing this button sets the motor drive speed shown in the LCD display. You have a choice of single, 2 frame, or 4.5 frames per second. The T90 is the first 35mm camera to incorporate 3 built-in switchable metering patterns: center-weighted averaging, partial metering that covers only 13% of the image area, and spot metering that reads 2.7% of the picture. To select the metering mode, push the metering mode button and turn the electronic control wheel. The LCD display shows the metering patterns you choose. You use the entire viewfinder area for metering with the center-weighted averaging mode. The larger circle in the viewfinder outlines the partial metering pattern. The small inner circle shows the area covered in the spot metering mode. Each time you press the spot metering button, the exposure is shown on the scale on the right side of the viewfinder. As many as 8 different spot readings can be stored in the camera's memory. The average of the exposure is displayed at the bottom of the viewfinder. Combining the 3 metering patterns with auto and 2 manual exposure modes makes it possible to cope with virtually every picture-making situation. You have a choice of shutter priority, aperture priority, stop down, program, and 6 variable shift programs. In shutter priority, you have a choice of shutter speeds from 30 to 1/4000th second in 17 half steps, giving you the flexibility to cope with everything from extreme low light to high-speed sports action. With aperture priority, or AV, you have control over depth of field. Push the mode button and use the electronic control wheel to set the camera to AV. Use aperture priority for portraiture, landscape, or extreme close-ups. The program mode is the easiest to use because it automatically chooses both shutter and aperture based on lighting conditions. It's great for travel pictures when you haven't the time to make decisions. You press the mode button and turn the electronic control wheel until program shows in the LCD. But the T90 takes the program mode one step further by giving you a choice of 6 additional program modes. The variable shift program modes consist of 3 tele and 3 wide programs. In program tele mode, the emphasis is on shutter speed. Going from P1 to P3 in this mode gives you progressively faster speeds to cope with action. In the program wide series, you set progressively smaller apertures for greater depth of field control. In stop-down AE, set display to AV, P, or program, and set the desired aperture. Use this mode when shooting with extension tubes or bellows. For manual fixed index metering, you set the display panel to TV and move the lens diaphragm setting off A. Push in the stop-down lever and check the exposure in the finder. Under and over exposure symbols indicate the direction in which to rotate the aperture ring for correct exposure. Turn the aperture ring until the symbol for correct exposure shows in the finder. You can also set the exposure by first setting the aperture and then changing shutter speed. The Canon safety shift is built-in insurance against exposure errors in the shutter and aperture priority modes. If the shutter speed or aperture is too high or too low for good exposure, the safety shift switches to a higher or lower setting. To operate the safety shift, you push both the ISO and exposure compensation buttons simultaneously. The letters SS show up in the LCD. To cancel, push the 2 buttons again. With highlight and shadow control, you have tremendous creative latitude over the image. You can record strong blacks and clean whites, for example, something not always possible with straight meter readings. First, switch to spot metering and take a reading on the area you want to control. To achieve a strong white, you use the H or highlight control to add exposure. To obtain a richer black, use the shadow control to decrease the exposure. The scale on the right side of the viewfinder indicates the amount of exposure you add or decrease. The exposure compensation feature of the T90 provides another means for changing tonal values, for a high or low key effect, for example. To activate the exposure compensation control, press the exposure compensation button and turn the electronic input dial. You can adjust exposure up to 2 stops in 1/3 stop increments. One of the most exciting features of the T90 is its programmable multi-exposure capability. First, press the metering and mode buttons simultaneously. The letter ME appear on the LCD. Then, program up to 9 exposures by turning the electronic control wheel. You can make multiple exposures, 1 exposure at a time, or use the motor drive for exciting action images on 1 frame. After the final exposure, the film automatically advances to the next frame. The T90 also has a system of easily interchanged viewing screens with a choice of 8 to match a wide range of subject matter. This is the T90, a camera designed to be an extension of your mind and hand. In the next section, we'll talk about the Canon 300TL Speedlight, the most innovative dedicated flash unit available today. The Canon 300TL Speedlight system brings automation to traditionally difficult flash situations. There are no exposure or ISO scales on the 300TL since it takes its film speed information directly from the T90's computer. Its features include advanced through-the-lens flash exposure, off-the-film flash metering, 30 to 1/250th second flash sync, flash exposure lock, automatic bounce flash, second curtain flash sync, and multiple flash accessories. It takes only 4 AA penlight batteries to power the 300TL. The flash head itself adjusts for lenses from 24 to 85 millimeters without accessory panels, and the head swings up and to the right and left for bounce flash. To use the ATTL system, turn on the main switch. Set the mode selector to Mode Set, the sync position selector to First Curtain Sync, and the Control Mode Set button to the ATTL mode. When you press the shutter release, several things happen. First, the camera's center-weighted averaging meter system makes an overall reading and selects a shutter speed and aperture. An infrared beam from the flash strikes the subject and returns and sends a second aperture reading to the computer. The camera's computer then selects a final aperture based on the information from the camera and the flash and thousands of algorithms stored in its memory. After the flash fires, the light is reflected back through the lens, and another meter cell reads the light directly from the film itself and cuts off the flash for the exposure. Using the ATTL setting, you automatically achieve well-balanced foreground and background for regular flash conditions and for daylight flash fill outdoors. You can also set the mode selector to program, and the camera automatically switches to the program mode and the flash to ATTL. Another innovative feature of the 300TL is its flash exposure lock. Used for unusual compositions when the main subject is to one side of the image area or in extremely strong backlight. You press the FEL button on the flash. Then aim at the important area of the picture. Push the camera's spot metering button and light of 1/20th the regular flash intensity strikes the subject. The information is then stored in the camera's computer, and when you press the shutter release, it determines the correct exposure. You can also use the highlight shadow control with FEL for greater image control. For bounce flash, you set the flash to ATTL. Then press the shutter release. If there's no flashing in the finder indicating inadequate exposure, shoot. The flash emitted is 1/20th full power. The computer then converts the flash to the correct reading. Second curtain sync is unique to the 300TL. The trailing image is recorded first, and then the flash image for a more realistic effect and greater creative control. Set the sync position selector to the right and use a slow shutter speed. Incidentally, if you set the main switch to the second red dot, the flash automatically turns itself off if it's not fired within 5 minutes, conserving battery power. And finally, a system of connecting cords and adapters make it possible to use the 300TL for off-the-camera and multiple flash. In the next section, we'll talk about accessories that expand the scope of the T90 and its flash system. The Canon Macro Ring Light ML2 is an extension of the through-the-lens flash exposure concept and brings automation to extreme close-up photography. Its through-the-lens auto-flash exposure does away with time-consuming calculations and also adds a creative lighting dimension to close-up and macro photography. With DX-coated film, the ISO of the film is automatically transferred from the T90's computer to the ML2. The ML2 is designed for use with any of the Canon Macro FD lenses. Whether you shoot in aperture priority AE or stop-down AE, exposure is determined by metering off the film itself. A focusing light illuminates the subject, and you can use either the right, left, or both flash tubes for either flat lighting or a modeling effect. A modeling light lets you check the lighting before you make the exposure. The Command Back 90 is another T90 accessory that expands the camera's creative potential. Features include dating, 24-hour clock, automatic recording of 6-digit code numbers, and the letters A through F automatic recording of 4-digit frame counter numbers, self-timer, interval timer, long release timer, and controls number of exposures from 1 to 99. The Canon Macro Light is a natural with the new Command Back 90 for automatic interval photography. The Canon Wireless Controller LC2 using infrared light allows remote operation of the T90 at distances up to 15 feet. 2 cameras can be operated simultaneously on 2 separate transmitting and receiving channels. The unit also has 3 operational modes: instant, 2-second delay, and auto-sensing for unmanned operation. In auto-sensing, an object breaking the light path between camera and transmitter automatically trips the shutter. The Canon T90 is designed to be part of the photographer's creative process, to respond to ideas and to make them into realities. This is the T90, so advanced that only Canon could have made it.